When the president does it, that means that it is not illegal.
By definition.
Exactly.
5 decades ago, Richard Nixon's definition of presidential power was just his wishful thinking. But today's Supreme Court has turned it into a reality, giving the next president absolute criminal immunity for so-called official acts. Nixon's crimes during the Watergate scandal, leading to his resignation and eventual pardon by Gerald Ford, reminds us of the worst that could happen. For example, murdering a political rival was not a hypothetical for Richard Nixon, according to our next guest. Former Watergate prosecutor Nick Ackerman writes that Nixon ordered a hit on Pentagon Papers whistleblower Daniel Ellsberg. Ackerman also points out that one of the reasons Nixon was forced to step down was the release of a recording of him trying to interfere in the FBI's Watergate probe, a clear case of obstruction of justice. But under the new Supreme Court decision, Ackerman writes, quote, there would have been no reason for him to resign. Nixon could have just picked up the phone and directed the FBI to terminate its investigation. Joining me now is former Watergate prosecutor Nick Ackerman. He also served as an assistant United States attorney for the Southern District of New York. Nick, thanks so much for being here. Your new piece, The Supreme Court Rewrites Watergate History, 50 years since Nixon's resignation, immunity decision would have undone prosecutions, is fantastic. I urge everybody to go out and read it. But the thing that's just struck me and shook me was the fact that Nixon ordered a hit on Ellsberg, which I was unaware of. But to your point, now, with this SCOTUS decision, you can't inquire into motive, and you certainly can't inquire if it was an official act of Nixon picking up the phone and ordering a hit on a political rival. Same thing could happen now with any president.
Of course. I mean, that's the whole problem with this opinion. Justice Roberts tries to pawn it off as some kind of fantastic idea that Justice Sotomayor is coming up with, talking about a Navy SEAL 6 going out and attacking and assassinating political rivals at the direction of the president. This is not so fantastic, and it's not so unusual. This is exactly what Richard Nixon did. Justices totally ignored this entire history of Watergate in coming up with this crazy opinion that permits somebody like Donald Trump, who has already come up with a plan where he says he's going to be dictator from day one, and he's going to suspend the Constitution, and has already violated a number of federal criminal laws. So this is basically opening up the floodgates to Donald Trump to do whatever he wants, and full steam ahead, which is really frightening.
Nick, something else that you wrote that really struck me as well was this idea that if a president like Trump gets absolute criminal immunity for his official acts, then by extension, it would make sense that subordinates that are following orders from Donald Trump, for example, to do criminal acts would also not be prosecuted because they're just, quote, following directions, instructions, or orders. Nick, we saw that happen with Hitler. We saw that happen in Germany. So
that's right.
What is this theory, I guess, by extension, that subordinates of a president like Donald Trump following his orders, acting criminally, they could not be prosecuted as well?
Well, the rationale throughout this opinion is that you can't really get behind the president's motive and what he's doing. And if he's got people, the executive branch, it's the executive branch, the president, that the Supreme Court is focused on. And if, in fact, it's the executive branch and Trump is ordering one of his subordinates to obstruct justice or to carry out a hit or to do whatever might be illegal, and if the president is ordering it and that's an official act and that can't be illegal, then how can you really prosecute somebody who is an arm of the executive branch who's carrying out that order? I mean, it really doesn't make any sense. Where does it stop? I just don't see how someone wouldn't have that defense.
And, you know, Nick, something that I was thinking about when I read your piece was the following, which is when everything was going on with Trump post-November 2020, leading up to January 6th, he had to, by necessity, go outside of the DOJ because there were people that actually maintained the guardrails at the Department of Justice to not participate. I mean, I'll exclude Jeff Clark, the oil spill lawyer. But other than Jeff Clark, there were people that had enough sanity to say, no, this is not going to happen at the DOJ. So he went to the John Eastmans of the world, and others. Kenneth Chesbro, again. How important is it, somebody like you who knows the historical importance and context of Watergate, now looking at it through the lens of this SCOTUS decision, to make sure that the DOJ has people in an administration with a president that have the courage and the moral compass to say no and to not actually participate in criminal conduct with the president?
It's extremely important. I mean, in fact, this did happen in Watergate. If you recall, there was a Saturday night massacre. Elliot Richardson, who was the attorney general, was fired by Nixon. Then the deputy attorney general, Ruckelshaus, was fired. And that left Robert Bork. And both Richardson and Ruckelshaus prevailed upon Bork to stay in there and not resign and do what Nixon asked, which was to fire Archibald Cox, because they were both afraid, all three of them were afraid, that Nixon would then put one of his cronies in charge of that Department of Justice and all hell would break loose. So that's happened back then. It happened under Trump, and it's going to happen again if Trump gets elected.
Unless we don't get Trump in office, but we know that Project 2025, it has an actual chapter on the Department of Justice and the installation of loyalists in the Department of Justice. And so, Nick, it would be a disaster of epic proportions if somebody like Trump is back in office with a blueprint like Project 2025 for the DOJ.
No question about it. I mean, he's first of all going to get rid of all of these civil servants. I mean, he's basically going to eviscerate the entire civil service at the Department of Justice. Those are the people that are the bulwark of our Justice Department that would stand up to somebody like Trump. But number one plan is to get rid of them. This is a plan that is all being directed by Donald Trump and Viktor Orban, the president of Hungary, who has basically set up the same system in Hungary such that it still exists as somewhat of a democratically elected country, except that they've rigged the entire system so that it's gerrymandered and that there is no way that Orban can ever be defeated. And it's the same thing that Donald Trump wants to do, to be dictator from day one and suspend our Constitution and do it sub rosa, the same way Viktor Orban has done it in Hungary.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.